I'm back with David Benedictus for the final part of our interview, episode number 9. David is the author of a book called Dropping Names. Show me the front with all the names. And the back is photographs of David as a younger man. Right, David, tell me, one of the chapters in your book is about sex in the 60s. Do tell me about sex in the 60s.
I will, but I'll tell you a little bit about sex in the 50s first, I think.
Okay.
I was at prep school from the age of, I was 8 and 3 days when I went up to Broadstairs, where the school was, for 5 years at Broadstairs, and then for another 5 years at Eton College, and then for another 3 years at Balliol College. All that time...
In Oxford.
Balliol College in Oxford. All that time I was living in the company of males. Women were strange creatures about whom I knew very little. I will give you one example of how little I knew. We were on holiday in Cornwall, where we used to go every summer. This was when I was still at my prep school, and then latterly when I started at Eton. We would go to the same hotel in Cornwall that the other families went to, and so we would have mild flirtations with the daughters of these other families. I remember one day it was raining, it always seemed to be raining, and we were in the snooker room, and my sister came back from the chemist's with a big package, and I was teasing her, wanting to know what it was, and she was giggling, and all the other girls were giggling, and then I insisted on knowing, and one of the girls told me it was an ST.
Oh yes, I knew you were going to say that.
I didn't know what an ST was. It was, of course, a sanitary towel,
Yeah.
and I was amazed to find out all about such things, about which I knew nothing. And the story was that when you got to Eton, of course, there were the daughters of the housemaster, if you were lucky. There were the maids, who were usually Spanish maids, but you would be dicing with death if you interfered with them in any way, I think. So most of the boys were attracted to one another. The ones who were going to be heterosexual would probably be attracted to the pretty little boys who looked like girls. I remember a little boy called Johnny Campbell, who looked exactly like a girl and had masses of golden curls. If you were going to be gay, you were probably attracted to the bigger boys, whom you would hero worship in some way. But we did actually know nothing. It was always traditionally supposed that when you left the school, you would be given a talk about the facts of life.
So you were there was no sex education at the school?
Only in the biology class, which I had flu the day they had.
That was
It had the reproduction of mammals.
Yeah,
I was in my bed of sickness.
In my school, it was amoebas.
But the things that were supposed to happen were 2 pieces of advice that you were given when you left Eton. One was, if you do go to a brothel, make sure you're not wearing your old Etonian braces. And the other one was, it was a talk which was supposed to begin with the sentence, "You may have noticed hanging between your legs." And I love the phrase, "you may have noticed," for these boys whose hormones were raging. And whose private parts were endlessly mobile. When I got to Balliol College, it was much the same. Women were not allowed in Balliol, as they weren't allowed, not allowed to be Balliol students. As in all the colleges, except for the 4 women's colleges that there were at the time. And girls were not really encouraged to come into the male colleges. At Balliol, they were known as the Balliol women or the Balliol girls. They would come and display themselves at ease on the Balliol lawn, but they had to be out of the college by 10:30. And the master of Balliol was reported as having said, if a Balliol man can't do what he wants to by 10:30, then there's no hope for him anyway. It was pathetic, really, and it led to a great deal of unhappiness. A friend of mine at Balliol, who was in the play we did together, was a big beefy guy, and his father was desperate for him to be a successful rugby player. But poor Michael, I won't tell you this other name, poor Michael was not inclined that way. And we had a cast party after we'd done this play, Balliol play, at which he was beating his head against the walls because he was so miserable at being the way he was and how upset his father was going to be when he found out. And
that he was gay?
That he was gay. And the next day we all went in a posse, about 4 of us, I think, to see the college, the provost at Balliol, because we felt that he was a danger to himself, which indeed he must have been. And we said to the provost, we're very worried about Michael, because when he'd had a drink or two last night, this is what he was doing. And the provost said, oh, well, I'll get him to see the doctor. I'm sure he can cure him. And that was the attitude, of course.
Yeah.
It was something to be cured. And it was still illegal, so that there were stories in the papers all the time, really, about people being blackmailed for their associations or sent to prison for indecent proposals, whatever it was. The famous Lord Montague trial took place at that time. And to look at the situation today, when homosexual men and women can even get married in church, it's almost impossible to believe that in one lifetime there have been such radical changes. I did have some lovely girlfriends. I recall there was Molly Vaughan, who was a very posh girl, and she came from a stately home in Wales, and I used to take Molly out what we called mud dipping. We'd find a nice piece of mud in the Thames, and we'd go and jump into it and splash around, which was clearly a substitute for sex after all. Molly, to my disappointment, having written me when I was in America a whole year of love letters, when I came back she'd got engaged to a bald stockbroker, so it was never going to work out anyway. Great disappointment to me that was. And then I had a fondness for a nice Jewish girl, Jill Slotover, who was extremely beautiful.
Slotover.
Yeah, I know, it's a good name. And she had taken silk, but she never practiced. But something about the family, who were so thrilled at the idea of getting a Jewish son-in-law, they were a bit too encouraging, and I think that rather put me off. I wanted something who wouldn't be suitable. And I had a little flirtation with Sally, who came from Nottingham, where her mother ran a dress shop, and I used to go and spend weekends there. And on the Friday night, Sally and I would go to the pictures, and her mother and her mother's boyfriend, who was the headmaster of the local prep school, they would have a little dalliance. And then on the Saturday night, they would go out to the cinema, and Sally and I would have a little dalliance. But that didn't amount to anything very much. I think it was all really being put on hold, and for the moment I left educational establishments, got a real job, and was thrust into the world of show business. After all, it was dazzling, because there were, at that time, particularly in the 60s,
freedom,
where women were learning to exploit their possibilities, really.
Yeah, burn the bra.
Well, it wasn't only burning the bra, it was also the miniskirt.
Yeah.
And it was the whole image that women were able to express themselves with the way they dressed.
Yeah.
There was even topless dresses sometimes in London. Girls would wear theirs. So it was as though something that was forbidden was now actually being welcomed and encouraged. And I remember getting desperate to lose my virginity. This was when I was at the BBC. I hadn't lost it all my time at
And
Oxford.
how old were you when you
lost it? I was
lost?
25.
Wow, that's late, isn't it?
Exactly. And I was getting desperate, as one would.
And who was the first?
I was sharing a flat with Peter and Paul, which was in Paddington, and they got worried on my behalf, and they said they'd find a girl for me, and they did. And they said she'd be delighted to help me out, and she wanted to go to the windmill and see the nude show at the windmill, which we did. And then we got back to the flat, and she told me that I can't believe this was true. She said that I'd managed it 6 times that night, which would indicate just how frustrated I must have been.
I think we'll end there, David. Thank you very much.
Can't even remember.